Hi, Mike Nee from Constellation Research, joined by Scott Brokaw, VP Product Data Integration at IBM. Today we're diving into a question that's become central to almost every conversation I have as enterprises are looking to operationalize AI. And this is where Constellation Research sees a fundamental shift in what has made integration and orchestration mission critical. Let's just frame that up for a second. We'll get right into the questions. We're talking about a stack of maturity over the last couple of years. Gen AI was really around data ingest, RAG, AI-ready data, batch and on-demand APIs, agentic, which was this year. Really tool invocation, event-driven, human loop, where integration was part of the decision loop of agents, handling state, identity, failure and retry. And we're already seeing, this year leaders, but next year, really the phase where we're moving towards process and AI-driven process automation, executing at scale, safety, orchestrating decisions, driving actions, feedback loops, which means enforcing policy, context, guardrails. When I speak with data and AI leaders and enterprise architects, they all agree that integration and orchestration is becoming mission critical. But there's an issue. They're struggling with how to embrace this change. So we thought it'd be a great opportunity to bring IBM into this conversation. And Scott, let's turn to you for this. Why do even sophisticated data teams struggle with integrating across their data estate to support, sort of AI and AI-driven processes and agents?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. I think the first thing is it's pretty clear enterprise AI needs data, right? And so how we think about the evolution of our data management architectures, this is really what's going to be key for how we make clients successful with enterprise AI. And I think the important piece that we have to remember is the user of data is changing. It's no longer a human. Like, we need to think about how we build actually for agents, right? And for the last 20 years, we've been optimizing our data architectures on reports and SQL queries and how humans are going to interact with our systems. But now our primary consumer is going to shift to being an agent, and so that's a fundamentally different design problem. But I think as we look at what organizations typically struggle with, they're struggling just to understand, like, what data do they even have, right? And I think more commonly than that, organizations are actually building for storage, not building for retrieval, right? And so we're getting really good at building data lakes and warehouses and trying to populate these things to hydrate how we can build applications on top. But at the end of the day, AI really isn't going to care about how elegantly we store data. It's going to care more about how fast and contextually we can retrieve it. And it's a different architecture, right? A different optimization that we have to think through. I think the second problem that we see organizations struggling with is unstructured data is largely not part of the AN solutions, and especially when we're thinking about enterprise AI, this is a completely untapped resource. 90% of data is unstructured. So I'm talking about documents, PDFs, emails, Slack conversations. We have to try to bring that same level of processing, pipelines, governance, enforcement, understanding that we do in the structured world. We need to bring this all to unstructured. And
people underestimate just how much it takes to actually convert that into data that's usable, right? Even just charts disconnected from the text that goes with them.
And more than even that, Mike, like, I think the bigger thing about it is unstructured brings a different level of access, right? So, think about when you get set a Box link or a OneDrive link, in your company today, and how many times you actually don't have access to that link. We take access control really seriously with these types of data medium. And so we have to make sure that as we propagate this down to retrieval flows, that we actually can bring the ACLs with the actual storage, right? And ensure that on retrieval, those ACLs can actually be enforced just like we would in a normal application.
So, I agree. I mean, we're certainly seeing enterprises, really think about integration, in the old way, moving data. In the AI era, it's about maintaining that sort of decision integrity and that flow of data, which is structured, unstructured, for machine AI, but actually also for humans. There's a lot around self-service in terms of helping me make a decision, where this layer becomes important. IBM has certainly been solving this problem for their customers for a long time now, and matched it with literally one of the broadest portfolios in integration, and continue to invest that with sort of acquisitions in that space. How does all this fit into sort of IBM's total approach for data and AI leaders in terms of how they need to shift to support what's needed for integration in the AI age?
Yeah, when we stepped back earlier in the year, we were looking at the entirety of our data portfolio and actually what's going on in the market too right now, which is an intense amount of consolidation in data management. And clients don't need more tools, right? They need less tools to do more, and they need more integrated tools, right? And at the end of the day, so we kind of stepped back and said we need to dramatically simplify how we think about our structure and how we can provide the services across data integration, across data storage, across things like governance and intelligence, and try to unify our stack together. So we have premier capabilities around data storage, our lakehouse architectures, really leaning into open file formats like Iceberg and Delta Lake, fit for purpose query engines. You mentioned the acquisition of DataStax. It's bringing NoSQL. It's bringing things like vector search, Langflow, actually one of the cool open source and open core components that we have. Really popular in the community right now. That's building a lot of momentum across our Watson X portfolio. We have a ton of capabilities in the data intelligence space. In the data intelligence space, it's more about trying to understand like what do you have, discover the data that's there, and then looking at data quality, how you put access controls in place, how you enforce, how you try to understand semantic relationships between data sets. Like we were talking about context a little bit, how you can bring that context to the front is imperative, right? Linking kind of the business semantics to the technical metadata and making that work for you. Thinking about how the data has relationships, right? Like you're watching how data flows throughout organizations, understanding the lineage of data, of how it's consumed, and then ultimately trying to activate it for consumption, right? So using things like data products to be able to ensure that you can have predictable, repeatable ways to actually expose data at scale to your consumers. And then in the data integration space, like we've had a ton of really opinionated verticals over the last 20 years, and we've consolidated that massively this year. Right? We went to a single horizontal control plane, switching all those verticals to capabilities. So we're trying to do this for a couple of reasons. Not just because clients want less tools, but because we're trying to force not a technology conversation, but ultimately a value conversation. Like you build a pipeline because you have a task in mind. You don't really want to care about, is it a batch pipeline or a streaming pipeline? Do I want to use a low code tool or use a high code tool or code first tool? Like we want to find ways that we can start to protect users from also the disruptions that are happening in the data storage space. We've gone from warehouses to Hadoop to cloud data warehouses to lake houses, and every single time we actually have to change the underlying plumbing of infrastructures. So you have to rewrite these data pipelines. And so if we can level those concepts up, take the ingestion, take the transformation logic, and actually abstract it away from the execution engines and make it so that it's more, I would say, disruption proof, right? Like allowing you to be able to adapt to that scale without having to completely rewrite and change that logic. That's what we've been trying to do across our data integration portfolio. Find ways that clients can take the best of the batch capabilities that we're known for, the streaming capabilities, ultimately, going across structured and unstructured data and start to weave these tools in, focusing on, like I said, lineage and observability and, how you actually bring the glue of this infrastructure together.
Even as most vendors avoid talking about determinism because it sounds kind of, old, right? But frankly, I'm saying it's sexy. Non-determinism is so often a failure mode at scale. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the value of bringing data to Gen AI, right? Gen AI is really good at the non-deterministic things, but how we can start to actually bring some of the predictable operational workloads and allow Gen AI to actually bring automation into that. That's where the magic will start to happen. It helps us move from the use cases that are very internal focused, right, where we're kind of trying to be safe about it, to things that we actually feel more confident about the outputs and predictable results. And the only way you can do that, right, is starting to bring together both your structured and unstructured data to actually allow the Gen AI tooling to be able to act on top of it in a predictable fashion. Things like when we build unstructured flows, we don't want to just chunk and then create an embeddings model for the data that's in the unstructured content, whether it's a document or otherwise. We actually want to extract entities, like find ways that we can find the structured pieces that are in that content, because then we can take that and actually put it in a normal Iceberg table, right, with normal text to SQL. And so for the more predictable operations, whether doing mathematical operations, whether doing lookups, like these are things that SQL does really well. And so the combination of both, vector searches and kind of this basis on, the structured information, that can actually give you the improved accuracy and confidence to take, some of these, kind of more, I would say, consumer focused tasks and have confidence to be able to use agents, to actually accomplish it.
Well, especially as vectors go, from more on the consumer side, handling maybe 100, 200 concepts, to a business which has 800, 1,000 concepts. You have to couple it with understanding the business entities. Like, what are the business, objects that we're really dealing with, so we can ground and actually decrease some hallucination. But this is a key shift. Agents can reason probabilistically, but enterprises still operate deterministically. I think you and I talked about this. The winning architecture, there's certainly going to be ones that let AI explore, but force execution down to a predictable, governed path. And this is really the difference between AI for insight and AI for execution. Okay, so we've hit on a couple key points, Scott. No doubt you have a ton of customers who can provide some great learnings. And I think it'd be awesome if you can share, like, when teams get integration orchestration right, what are some of the business outcomes that move? And actually, maybe even more importantly, how do they know when they get it wrong? What are the first signs, technical, organizational, that AI-driven integration is about to fail, right? No doubt you have some great stories on both sides.
Yeah, let's talk about some of the things that the clients have gotten right. We work with a lot of really awesome enterprise clients. I'll name a couple, right? So Lockheed Martin, they have a ton of data systems across their organization, and they've been working on trying to consolidate those data systems onto one. And so they really are trying to go towards I would say tens of thousands of engineers that they have to make sure that they can query a set of documents, unstructured documents in natural language. It's not incremental. It's trying to take the institutional knowledge that's there in those documents and start to be able to query it at scale. We've worked with Crushbank. They have a particular use case where they've seen 40% more of their help desk tickets actually being able to be closed in a day. Things like first call resolution. They've been able to get that up to 20% efficiency. They're doing that through scaling some of the capacity and using some of these core principles around Watson Excel data, especially to be able to understand what data they have and then ultimately organize in a fashion that allows them to build applications on top. I think when we look at clients that are struggling, right, where they typically get tripped up is they're looking at typically stale data, right? We talked about kind of that idea of real time. How we can try to help the enterprise understand what's up to date and what's the latest, right? That this is a key concept. Now, not everything needs to be real time, to be clear, right? But how we get data in motion, this is really, really critical to how we ultimately can help make clients successful. I think the other thing that we see a lot of clients struggling with is they get stuck in kind of just doing pilots, right? And so our most keen recommendation is focus on something that will have a 10x impact to your business, and just laser focus down on that one use case, that one task. It kind of gets you out of the pilot mode and it focuses first on the outcome. It gets to some of the deterministic points that we were talking about too, like not just thinking that the model that you pick is going to ultimately be the one thing that saves you. You really need to pair how you use models effectively with your data architecture, right? And I think stepping into that is key.
I love what you just said. I mean, if I could just paraphrase a little bit, in my old world of data quality isn't just the accuracy of the data. It's timely. Is it connected to other things so you can draw the conclusion? And so this is, again, when you start thinking about trying to make decisions on data, it starts getting into not just, did I get the data stored somewhere? Did I actually have it in a place that I can actually drive decision velocity off of? So, getting it right, first things that move are not just model accuracy, but metrics. I love what you said: cycle time, exception rates, decision confidence, right? Handoffs are faster, execution, and a clear line of signal to action. And certainly when you get it wrong, I've certainly seen more than my share of this. They're rarely just technical. You see retries, brittle workflows, stalling because you can't resolve the state of the context. And organization, you see teams putting humans back in the loop, right? Manual overrides, shadow processes, and double checking just in case. This is, I'm sure we've all seen a couple of these. So let's just end with the key question here that, of course, it's getting back to what's that one thing that data and AI leaders should prioritize in 2026? How do they really get started here?
Yeah, my biggest recommendation is we need to make sure we're focusing on instrumenting our data, not just for humans and human use, but how we expect the next wave of access, which is around agents. And I think most enterprises are still optimizing for kind of the human access path. And reality, when we start to look at where the biggest consumers are going to be on our data management systems, it's going to be agents. And they need and they require a different level of infrastructure. They're gonna ask for kind of more sub-second response times. It's not the same thing that we were doing before, right? How we provide that context that we were talking about. The understanding of the business semantics and the technical metadata, trying to understand relationships. This is what's going to allow agents to ultimately be more successful across our data architectures. So practically what it means is like, we want to help clients start to think about how they unify both unstructured and structured data together and treat it as a first-class citizen across their data architectures.
But I do think you're spot on in terms of what leaders should be looking at. How do they think about intentional about 10 decision areas to automate, re-engineer those flows for where you can actually give decision rights to where machines can actually take on a little more repeatability, some decisions, and where you still need humans in the loop. And this is where they design for the integration architectures that make those boundaries explicit and auditable. So Scott, this has been a great conversation. What's clear is that we're moving from AI that assists work to AI that executes on work, and that has so many implications. The moment that AI executes, integration and orchestration stop from just being plumbing, and becoming part of this, decision infrastructure, with the ability to close the loop and orchestrate between data signals, context, semantics, and frankly, the trust to roll it out, right, at scale, to your point. So, this is where, the shift we're entering, the work leaders need to start, like, frankly, now, because we're seeing that shift in terms of what the boards and the executive teams are demanding. So thank you, Scott, for your insights, man. Thank you for sharing your perspective on real world examples. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. We look forward to continuing the conversation as enterprises navigate this next phase of AI-driven operations.